Welcome to this video tutorial series on Savage Worlds and Fantasy Ground. This is part 1 of a multi-part series, and today we'll cover the topic why you should consider Savage Worlds in the first place. And the thing that I particularly like about Swade is that it is fast, furious fun. This is what Pinnacle Entertainment, the makers of Savage Worlds, took as their guideline on how to create a good rule set. Basically, they've looked at all the rule sets on the market and thought, okay, what is slowing gameplay down? What goes against fast? And just cut this out and try to modify and redo the rules so it stays fast. And then also, what is not fun? What are things that many players and also DMs do not want to keep track of, and try to cut this part out as well and keep it as simple as possible. The simplicity comes out of how you roll within the game. Each skill and attribute, instead of having a plus or minus value, is assigned a die type. And these die type increase. They start from a D4, then D6, then D8, then D10, and then D12. So the higher your die is, the better you are in a skill. However, the target number that you need to reach to succeed stays the same. It's generally 4, but some special abilities like tests might be contested. But generally, just remember it's 4, and if it is a difficult check, then there may be a penalty to that roll. Another thing that I really like are all the different settings that are available. Weight is built as a template, so it is not written with a particular setting in mind. It's a very good baseline for a rule set, and then you would generally get an additionally one setting to it. That may be something like Lankmar, which is the typical fantasy setting that goes on top of Swade. So if you want to play something in fantasy, you may want to consider getting this module on top of just having Swade. In addition to that, all of these settings are generally relatively cheap. It shouldn't hurt too much to buy both Swade and the setting together. It will probably still be cheaper than if you buy another rule set that is already set in a setting. Then we have character creation. Character creation is beautiful because you're completely free form. There are no classes, so you can just say, I want my character to be good at X, and really build a character that is really, really good at this one thing. To assist you with that, there is something called edges. Now these edges are there to define your character even further. I'm just going to pick one, which in this case is counterattack. What counterattack does is when you get attacked, and the creature hitting you misses, you get to do a counterattack against the creature. So if you're thinking about, I want that kind of tanky character, but that also fights back when being attacked, then this would be an edge that you take, and you can take several over the course of leveling up. And in return, there is something called hindrances. The hindrances are something that you generally only play out as a role-playing mechanism. It's not necessarily something that makes your character worse. There are some that do, but the majority of them is really more of a role-playing hook where you're supposed to role-play having that kind of hindrance. Let me pick one out. I would say illiterate, for example. So your character cannot read. So whenever you run into something that you need to read, then your character will just be standing there and will have to believe what people around him tell that character, because that character just cannot read. This is generally not only to make your character worse, but also if you particularly role-play that well, then most GMs will give you a Benny, which is a thing that allows you to reroll. The leveling curve, because of that edges basically just giving you or defining your character more, and the skill increases being also relatively flat increase, means that a level 1 character and a level 10 character is not 10 times as strong, but maybe twice as strong or so. So it means that even if characters are not all the same level, they can generally still play very well together. In addition to that character creation, or whenever you create a character, you might want to consider becoming some kind of wizard. And for that we have arcane backgrounds. Arcane backgrounds are the way you cast spells in Savage Worlds. So you pick a type of spell casting. There is magic, miracle, psionics, and weird science. Miracles is basically praying, magic is casting a spell, psionics is using your mind to create a spell. They're just different descriptions of how it works, but generally you just roll for that one skill that you have and then cause a power to happen. And then there's weird science, where you're actually this weird scientist tinkering and using tools to make these very weird contraptions that then cast the spell for you or cause the spell to happen. Spells themselves are very basic descriptions, and you are encouraged to then make them cool. As in, there's a bolt power. So bolt power is you attack an enemy and then deal 2d6 damage. Pretty boring, but what you're supposed to do is to give it a trapping. A trapping is the way the spell manifests in the world. So for example, if you were to give it a fire trapping, then you no longer have like a standard bolt, but you might have the fire bolt of doom. It would still deal these 2d6 damage, but it's now looking like a firebolt when you cast it. That gives you a lot more versatility in how your spells manifest yourself in the world, and it also gives you the ability to make a really cool themed caster. So let's say you don't want to go with something standard, default, like fire magic, but you actually want something really cool. You want to be a sewage mage. And then you can totally make all of your spells related to sewage, if that's what you intend to do. The versatility is really the place where the arcane backgrounds shine. And in addition, if you take an edge called Artificer, you're also able to turn this into items that they can give to other people, and then these other people can cast the spells from that item. Due to the flat leveling curve and the inherent simplicity with the rolling system, it is difficult to design items that just give straight bonuses to someone. A +2 bonus on a d4 is a tremendous change. So on a d4, you have a 25% chance to roll a 4, which means that if you have a +2, you're suddenly shifting it up and you now have a 75% chance to succeed. So that is a major shift and means that rolling becomes a lot less difficult for the player. And I mean by such a huge margin that rolling becomes almost pointless, because you're just going to succeed or you're going to crit fail. These are your two options. And I personally do not find it really good. So I personally just make my own magical items and just inspire myself by other rules set what they have to get around that item progression. This also leads then into campaign length, because of course the longer your campaign is, the more your players want to feel that, hey, I'm really becoming stronger, I'm like the super unkillable beefcake. In these super long campaigns, not being able to give out cool items really hurts. Talking about campaigns, I personally find the campaigns included in most setting books rather lacking. So they just say, okay, in this part of the campaign, X happens, and that is it. So you don't really get the description how your players may be interested in a story going on, or you often get stats blocks for enemies, but you very rarely get a map associated with it. So a lot of it you need to figure out yourself. And when it is stat blocks, it's generally just one big encounter in the plot point campaign. So it's not like you're going through this entire dungeon and here are the 10 encounters you're going to face in the dungeon. It's more the final boss of this dungeon is dead and you need to figure out the rest of this dungeon. It's a little bit lacking, but I don't mind it too much because I homebrew a lot of stuff anyway. And as you can see, I have setting listed twice. Now, settings can introduce a certain level of complexity, which defeats the purpose of being fast, furious fun, and that the rule set is simple. So be mindful of that. Read through all the additional rules a setting implements, and then decide for yourself if this is a level of complexity you're happy with. This generally is only a problem once you get to automatic weapons and a lot of vehicular combat. Everything else should be fine, so as long as you stay away from this topic, you will be okay. Now, I've talked a lot about settings, so let's see what kind of settings there are. Now, this is just a small selection, basically all the settings that I either have played or know of well enough that I feel comfortable talking about. There is a document in the description where you can read up about all the settings that are currently available in Fantasy Grounds to buy. And of course, if you want, you can totally use one that is not available to buy within Fantasy Grounds and just type in the stuff yourself. In the fantasy corner, we have Lankmar, which is your standard 5e-ish rule set. So it plays very much like Dungeons and Dragons, at least from the setting, it feels very much like this. Then you have Beasts and Barbarians, which you can guess is Conan the Barbarian. And then if you want, really its very, very own setting, Hellfrost does something very different from other fantasy settings. So if you're just like, I need to get away from this 5e stuff, but I do generally like this fantasy style, then Hellfrost is the one that you want to go for. Then we come to post-medieval. The first one listed there is the one that started it all, Deadlands. So before Savage Worlds was Savage Worlds, there was actually Deadlands, and Savage Worlds was created out of that land. You're a cowboy, there is occult stuff going on, you're going through the Rocky Mountains, deserts, and gold digger towns. It's a really fun rosette. Then you have 50 Fathoms, where you're a pirate and sailing the seas. And then you have Rippers, which brings you to the around 1900, where Frankenstein, Dracula, Jack the Ripper, and so on are around, and you need to stop them. When we come to modern times, we come to my personal favorite setting, which is East Texas University. Every player is a student at a university and needs to deal with their usual school stuff. But at the same time, apparently that university was built on ley lines, and there are demons, ghosts, spirits, and whatever else popping up all the time, and you as students need to stop them with only the tools that you would have available to you as a student. So no, you're not here these super strong fighters. You don't have like big guns and everything. No. You're just a student and need to figure out how to deal with that. Then we have War of the Dead, which is basically zombies. And then we have Weird Wars, which is World Wars, again with this light occult thing infused into it. And then finally we come to sci-fi, where I just picked two. Last Parsec is your Star Trek, Star Wars, Mass Effect thingy, where you're traveling from planet to planet, you have battles, sci-fi battles and so on. While Interface Zero is more cyberpunk, so you're on one planet, corporations have ruined everything, and you are just a hacker running around in the world. And of course, there are many, many more, way more than I can mention here. So please check the description for a full document where I have listed around 30 or 40 of them. For most of the base system, there's also a companion that you can get. For example, there's a fantasy, a horror companion, and a sci-fi companion. These are highly recommended if you play within that rule set and you're not picking a pre-written setting. So let's say you like neither Langmar, Beasts and Barbarians, or Hellfrost, then you may as well just use the fantasy companion, because that gives you like the nice baseline of these weapons exist, these armor exists at the time, and so on. Yes, and with that, we are already at the end of the short introduction. I hope this was very helpful for you, and there are more videos soon to follow. I am, again, Flo from the Fantasy Grounds College. We would be very happy to have you. If you have any questions, just join our Discord, link in the description below, and see you then. Bye!